All right. Thank you all. My name is Ignacio Fuentes. I work for Telerik. You might know it as a company that makes Kendo UI. We also, yes, we make NativeScript. So show of hands, who is here making mobile applications, first of all? All right, a few people. Who has heard of NativeScript? All right, that's great to hear. So just I want to take a quick recap. It's not just going to be an intro to NativeScript, although I am going to show some of how it works. The idea is that we're going to go a little bit deeper this time. We're going to show how you can add some style into a NativeScript application. As a summary, NativeScript is an open source framework for building truly native mobile applications. We are going to be using Angular completely, but it's good to keep in mind that when we're talking about NativeScript, we're talking about truly native mobile apps. What that means is there is no trick, essentially. There's no browser, no DOM, no HTML, no web view. What you see on the screen is a real native app. So think about you see a button on the screen, you see a label on the screen, you see a list view on the screen. Those are the real UI components that come straight from the source. If we're talking about iOS, those are the labels, the buttons, and the list views that Apple created for any of their apps, the Facebook app, the Twitter app, whatever, right? So it's a truly native mobile app that does not use anything regarding HTML. You are still going to be structuring, the architecture of the app is going to be Angular, for instance, but there isn't going to be any divs or spans. You're going to be using real native components. I guess what I'm trying to say, this is not based on Cordova, which is how a couple of solutions out there would do it. Those solutions end up, they're all right, you can work with that, but those solutions end up being, depending on what you're doing, not necessarily as performant. You can't work with the native UI, the native hardware, really, the camera, the GPS, and that kind of stuff. So with NativeScript, you get full use of that. So what you get is skills reuse. So you're still going to be using JavaScript, TypeScript, CSS even to style the application. But again, what you end up getting is the experience as a web developer, but the actual outcome of a native mobile app. You get to reuse NPM modules. So of course, it's not like you can use jQuery here, but any NPM module out there that is not necessarily tied to the DOM, or it's not necessarily tied to a node server, so somewhat of a generic JavaScript-based library on NPM, you can use that. And you can also use any of the third-party iOS and Android libraries. So think about CocoaPods, right? This is like the huge marketplace for iPhone developers to share open source projects, and they can use it for their Swift or their Objective-C based apps. You can actually use any CocoaPod in a NativeScript app. There's some technical reasons for that. Essentially, we can map any of the SDKs into the JavaScript namespaces and the global namespace. So one thing that I want to clarify, and this is a frequent question that we get, at no point will you find yourself in Xcode or in Android Studio. You can do it all from Visual Studio Code. I don't even know how to open my Xcode, to be honest, and I don't have Android Studio installed on my machine. So you're never going to find yourself in that situation, which is, I see some nodding heads, and that's good. And the other thing is that you can easily use it in any native API. So again, just to make it super clear, you have access to 100% of the APIs. You can think of any class, method, property, namespace, anything that is exposed in the native SDKs, you have access to it in plain JavaScript code without jumping through any kind of hoops. So you can think of NativeScript as the bridge between the native world of iOS and Android and the JavaScript space. A quick example that we can take a look at here is if we see this little snippet of code, we can see that we're creating an instance of a time object, right? This is completely JavaScript, but I can create a new android.text.format.time object, and I can set methods on it. These are the methods that come straight from the source. I am passing it 3 parameters, and the parameters are 3 numbers in the JavaScript sense of things, right? But they're being passed into the set method, which would be part of the time object, the instance of the time object on the Android world. And we're, in fact, even console.logging the output of the time.format method, which itself takes in a string. So this is all JavaScript, but the objects that you're working with are native objects. The same can be said for iOS. We can create an instance of a UI alert view if we wanted to. Of course, the idea is to build it in a cross-platform way, and we'll take a look at that later. But you can, at any time, create an instance of a UI alert view, set the message property on it, invoke the add button with title method on it, and invoke the show method, and of course, show that alert. And the API comes, like I said, straight from the source. You don't have to, there's no Telerik documentation that you need to go into. Everything comes straight from the source. The cool thing is that since we actually leverage TypeScript, you will be getting IntelliSense. You can get IntelliSense for all of these objects, so you don't have to figure out what they are. You have access to all of it, and it's exactly mapped from where it comes from into the JavaScript space. Now, of course, at this point, you might be wondering, how in the world is this even a cross-platform solution? Because what we're looking at is a UI alert view that obviously will only work on iOS. So to get it to work on a cross-platform, we have created some cross-platform modules. For instance, if we're talking about the UI, you'll have a set of whitelisted components that you can use, and you're going to structure it in an XML markup. So for instance, there will be a label, there will be a button, there will be a list view, there will be a tab view, there will be a side drawer navigation. So the usual things that you would expect in a mobile app, you have them within the NativeScript app. And to give you a quick preview of how that looks like in the Angular aspect of building an application, imagine your Angular component. Instead of writing the regular HTML, this is the markup that you put in there. So the application, the Angular application will have components, it will have services, pipes, all those concepts apply, even Redux if you wanted to use it, but only in the markup you use NativeScript specific markup, and that's how you get an Angular architected native mobile application in a cross-platform way for iOS and Android. These are the UI cross-platform modules, but we also have some non-UI stuff. So you can think about, maybe how do you make an HTTP request? Well, you don't have to figure out the native way of doing it. We have a cross-platform HTTP client that allows you to issue network requests in a cross-platform way. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. There's the file system module as well, so you can work with any files with a cross-platform API. But it's good to see that even you write using that file system module that we've created, but internally what's happening is that depending on the platform, it is invoking, let's say on Android, it would be invoking a new instance of a java.io.file path. And if it's on iOS, it figures out that it needs to do an ns-filemanager.default manager. So this is the stuff that you don't want to learn. If you find yourself in the situation that you actually need to use some very, very obscure API, you can use it. And let's say that file instance class, you can call .ios, and that gives you the file instance in the iOS world. And then you have access to all the methods and properties in there. And you can call file.android, and that gives you the instance of the Android file, and then invoke any method in there. So of course you have to be clever. You need to structure your application smartly if you want to do that. But it's totally possible because we're not hiding anything. So these are there's quite a few, but there's also the community-based plugins, and the community is huge, and we're actually going to use a couple of community plugins today to show how you can, an application, you can expand it with all kinds of clever things. Now, one thing that might be a little bit out of left field, because we're looking at non-HTML things, but to style the application, you can use CSS. So we have, we figured out that developers, especially NativeScript developers, they will want to style their application using the things that they know. So CSS is what we allow you to use, and our rendering engine basically goes through your CSS, figures out what it's trying to do, and then puts those styles and sizes and widths and paddings and that kind of stuff into the UI. So you don't worry about it, right? It's not like you can do any CSS. We have a subset of CSS, and that's very much thoroughly documented what it is that you can and cannot use. But the typical things you can use. Anything that's out is basically because it didn't make sense to implement it in the first place. To use NativeScript, the thing that you need to do is obviously install it. There's a CLI tool that you can install via npm, and then that gives you NativeScript. Then to run NativeScript, you can simply do tns run iOS. Now at this point, what it does, and this is where I find that it's even a better experience. Let's say that I'm only building an iPhone application, right? Like for some reason, my company doesn't even care about an Android version of the application. It's still better to use NativeScript, and the reason for that is because you're going to be building the application much faster. When you compile the application on NativeScript, it puts it on, let's say we're talking about the simulator. It puts it on the simulator, and at that point, any change that you make, you don't need to stop the app, you don't need to recompile the app, and you don't need to redeploy the app to that simulator, which is what would happen if you were building with Objective-C. This, any change that you make, gets live sync, is what we call, and it gets sent into the running app. So you see the changes immediately. So let's say that it's taking you 8 seconds, right, for stopping, rewriting the code, recompiling, redeploying. That's 8 seconds per change, and that's going to add up quickly. So the actual development experience is going to be much faster for you, even if you're building for one platform. Now add that to the fact that you can also, of course, build for Android, and then it's a ridiculous comparison, in my opinion, at that point. Now, when it comes to Angular, there is a NativeScript Angular integration. This is an official plugin that we've created that allows you to use the Angular architecture. So if you structure your code correctly, and shameless plug at this point, if you come to the event in September, there will be a talk on how to share code from a web application and a native mobile application, so you can share as most code as possible. Again, like I mentioned before, especially the services, those are no-brainers. It's going to be trivial to share those. But even the components, if you structure them correctly, you can actually share. And there are some seed GitHub projects out there that allow you to set up the HTML on one file and the NativeScript markup on another file. So it's literally the same component code running, and then just dynamically picking which markup file to use for actually running in either the web or the native mobile app. So with that, let's get our hands dirty. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is show you the CLI, right? The command that you're going to use is TNS. That might be a bit small. So TNS stands for Telerik NativeScript, and that's the command that you'll use. So you can create, some demo app. Create some demo app, and then if you use this --ng, that stands for Angular, and it's going to use the Angular template. By default, we don't use the, NativeScript. You can use NativeScript in a vanilla way if you don't want to use any frameworks at all. But you can use it with Angular, and you actually can use it with Vue.js if you were to be using that as well. So we're not close to any solution. NativeScript can be used in a vanilla way, Angular way, or Vue. That's an experimental phase at this point, but it's good to know that it's also possible. So with that, you can go into that demo app, and let's open up and see the code. And at the same time, I'm going to actually just run it. So the first time, it is going to compile the application. What it's doing is using the Xcode tools underneath it all. That is producing an Xcode solution, but you don't ever open it. You don't have to go in there at all. So internally, it produces the Xcode solution and compiles the Xcode solution and puts it on the running simulator. So the code that we have is a very simple application at this point. It's going to be a list of items. And let's take a look at the component. So we can see here, this is a regular component. There's nothing here that says NativeScript if you see what's being imported. Import component, import init, import item service. Nothing specific to NativeScript. But when we go to the markup, you'll notice, by the way, that the extension of the file does say .html. That is an Angular requirement. It's not like it could say .NativeScript. But if you go into the file and you take a look at the markup, you'll notice this is what I was mentioning before. We're looking at a list view, which is a NativeScript component that you get out of the box. And the template it's going to be using for each of those is it's going to be a label that's going to be repeated across the board. And here it is. It's a very simple list view that we see right here. There's not a lot to this application, but we can see how it kind of works. Now, you don't always want to be doing this kind of stuff from scratch. So we have created some nice templates, getting started templates that you can make use of. So let me show a couple of those. We call this our starter kit, and it comes with 3 flavors of the templates: the tab navigation, the drawer navigation, and the master detail. And for each of those, we've created a vanilla one, another vanilla one with TypeScript. So there's one with JavaScript, one with TypeScript, and one with Angular, of course, using TypeScript. So let's create one of those. I'm going to be using the tab navigation at this point. Get out of this. And let's call it Angular Meetup. And it's going to be using the template tab navigation Angular. Now for this application, I want to use a couple of other plugins. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and add those plugins right away so that we don't have to be recompiling the app. That's one thing that you do need to be aware of. If you're going to be adding more modules or resources and that kind of stuff, you do need to recompile the app at that point because those changes cannot be live synced. So for new modules, new NPM and things like that, you do want to recompile the app. But let's go there, and Meetup, clear that. And I'm going to add a couple of plugins here. Here's one. The name, I'd be giving away what it's going to do, maybe. I'll add fancy alert. Also might be giving away what it's going to do, but that's fine. And I am going to add a special plugin straight from Telerik called NativeScript Telerik UI. And we'll take a look at each of these. But before we do that, let's send that app onto the device. The first time, it does need to pull down a couple of Cocoa Pods, in fact, for some of these plugins. But in the meantime, there's another thing that comes out of the box with all of our plugins, and that is our theme. So who has used Bootstrap for your web applications? Cool. All right, so inspired by Bootstrap, we've created NativeScript theme. And the idea behind NativeScript theme is that you'll get a common set of styles and CSS classes that you can use for all kinds of stuff so that, it's not like the most polished application and refined, but for like getting started, it's a great tool that you can use. So all of the templates, probably most of the templates will have the theme pre-installed. It's a separate NPM plugin, but yeah, you do want to use it because it gets you very much ahead. And it comes with, out of the box, it comes with a bunch of different color schemes. So you can switch and change from like dark, light, aqua, forest, all kinds of themes in there. All right, where are we? There we go. We can see the whole thing. Let's make this smaller. Oh, that's worse. All right, we can kind of see that. We don't need the console at this point. Oh, the only thing that we need is to open up Visual Studio Code. Don't need this one anymore. Get this out of the way. This too. Okay, so what we see now is we have a simple application with 5 tabs. So let's start adding things into this application. So for instance, for this home component, let's find that tab. And let's add something simple in here. All right, so we see we've added a button, and the one thing that we do, and one thing that you'll notice, if you're like getting started with NativeScript, if you add a button yourself, what you'll get is an unstyled button. So this is where NativeScript theme comes into play. Those classes come from the NativeScript theme pack, and buttonnet and button primary makes it look like that. Now we also see right here that we have a tab handler that it just says click. So let's add some logic to that. All right, so the only thing that we're going to do is when we handle that click event, we're going to toast. So this is a typical UI paradigm that some people tend to use for signaling that something good has happened or something. So that's a toast. And the cool thing is that this will work on Android as well. I think this UI paradigm came from Android, and it's hard to get it done on iOS mostly. So this came from the community, and we're happy to receive it, the Toast plugin. Very simplistic. Maybe we can do something a little bit more advanced. So let's use this second tab right here to add a list view. Browse markup. Now that list view at this point is not going to work because I haven't added any items. So let's do that as well. And this is still not going to work because it requires HTTP. And that is a service that I need to add into my app module. Let's add that. Let's take a look at what this list view is of. So it is a list view of supposedly the participants that are here. This is coming from, if we take a look at the code, from the Meetup API that is showing who is here. So can anybody find their names in here at all? I hope. Unless people are just RSVPing and not coming, but I don't think that's the case. Yeah. This, by the way, I'm not a designer, to be honest. I actually grabbed all this CSS classes and this template from the NativeScript theme as well. Just copied and pasted it. It's got the round thing that with clever CSS you can do to turn an image into a circle. And the other thing that I added that we can notice in here is that on that item tab, if we tap it, there is this TNS fancy alert. So before we do that, I want to show that TNS fancy alert. So this, again, came from the community, and it is a great example of the power of NativeScript. This is a plugin that Nathan Walker created, and it's based on SCL alert view for iOS and color dialog for Android. What he did is he took those two libraries and simply created a thin wrapper that allows you to use it within NativeScript so that when it's on iOS, it uses SCL alert view, and when it's on Android, it uses the color dialog. But what you get is a clean API to get fancy alerts onto your app, like this one right here. So again, this, I'm not showing it on Android because that takes some more memory of my machine, and I only want to run one simulator at a time. But this works on Android as well, and it's a very, in my opinion, it's a very, very polished plugin that you want to use. This is only using show success, but there's all kinds of maybe show error. Maybe in the case of somebody that didn't come, will show an error. There we go. So it's a very cool set of alerts that you can use. Moving right on, let's say for this search tab, we want to show another cool thing that comes out of the box with NativeScript. So let's go into the template. And we'll take a look at what this is in a second. All right. So on the web, you're probably used to using font-based icons. So for instance, right here, we can see that that's the Google logo. And this is coming straight from the Font Awesome cheat sheet. So we can actually use any of this. Let's say we find, all right, yeah, we can, let's do this. And this is using the Flexbox layout. If you're into like that new way of styling via CSS, of setting up a layout, you can use Flexbox as well. Let's do a graduation cap. And somewhere in here, we will get right there, graduation cap. So this is very tiny right now, but it's just a font. You can add any size to it. It won't mess up the resolution, any color, whatever. So Font Awesome and any other font file you can add into the NativeScript app, and it should just work. All right, moving right on. Let's see for this future tag. OK, so this is what I want to show, Telerik UI for NativeScript. And I have that right here. So this is a set of advanced components that you don't get out of the box. Some of them are free. Some of them are paid components. But for enterprise applications is where you'll find that it's most useful for. You'll get calendar. You'll get charts. You'll get a form, an advanced form creator, an advanced list view that allows you to do all kinds of operations within a list view, like reorder, adding commands to each of the items, etc. A side drawer as well comes with it. So let's use the calendar for this one. Let me go into the featured. All right, so we can see it's very straightforward. It's rad calendar. We're not adding any properties to it. We could. There's some properties for like, actually marking some events on the calendar. Oops, and I'm missing the app module. I need to import the calendar module in here. And the data form module for the next demo. Oop. There we go. All right, so now we have a calendar. So again, advanced UI that it would not be trivial to create yourself. You have it right here out of the box. Again, cross-platform and native. You can set events on it, passing it an event source, so you can mark, with a little green color or something for the events, and you can mark them on the calendar for something actually useful and not just a calendar. And finally, let's figure out what we can do for the settings. All right, let's use the form creator module on the settings component. I'll show this code in a bit. All right, so again, it's very straightforward. It's a rad data form, and it takes a source as a parameter, and that is going to be a property from your component. And in this case, it's a settings property that we see right here. So that's created a form for ourselves. You can style it a lot more advanced than this, but this is like the unstyled approach. And it comes from each of the properties on the class that I'm using. In this case, I'm using an instance of a settings class. So we can see right here that there's a name, age, email, city, etc. We can, it also has a last name right here, it seems, but nothing is set on it. So maybe we can set it. And I will use my last name. And just by adding that property now, the form should be auto-populated with an extra set of fields right there. Again, when I save, I can toast, and it shows that fancy toast message. One last thing that I want to do is, let's say we go back into this home page, home.component.html. Instead of this button, let's add an image. This will code by hand. All right, source. Let's actually find the Angular logo, for instance. All right, and I want to add a tab handler on it. Let's see if it even shows first. That's too big. Let's just make that, whatever, 80. All right, and let's handle that onTap event. It's going to be args, and what I want to do is I want to get that view, and I want to animate it. Let's say that it takes us 3 seconds to do that. And what I'll do with it is I will rotate it on the tap event. And there you go. It's spinning like crazy. All right. That's about what I have to show on the demo. Again, I will plug that you need to come to NativeScript Developer Day. It's going to be 2 days, all kinds of sessions, very advanced. So if you want to get the most out of it, you probably want to try NativeScript before. There's going to be some introductory stuff, but if you want to go into the advanced stuff, there's going to be some great speakers there. There's going to be lunch. There's going to be social events related to the thing. Another thing, in preview right now, we have a product called NativeScript Sidekick. This is going to be, in particular, in my opinion, useful for people on Windows machines, because one thing that we can't get away from is that to build an iPhone app, you need to have a Mac. That's the only thing that can produce and compile an iPhone app. NativeScript Sidekick gives you a cloud solution. So you build the application just like I'm doing right now, but when you hit build, it goes to the cloud, compiles it there, gives it back, and then the live sync process takes over, but you never had a Mac anywhere on that process. So especially for Windows, it's great. It also gives you better starter kits than what we have been looking at right now, the debugging and live sync, plugin management with a fancy UI, not just that command line approach, and asset management, again, with a fancy UI. But yeah, you should try it out. It's called NativeScript Sidekick. It's currently a preview, but it's going to be great. All right, and that's it. Thank you.